Hello everybody and welcome back to part 2 of this 3-part little series on the Battle of Thermopylae. So, last segment we talked about some of the numbers of the Greeks. So, here we're going to talk about the actual battle, or particularly the first 2 days of the battle and what the Greeks were up against. So, as we stated, the Greeks had a force from anywhere from about 5,000 to over 7,000. And they had that advantage of defending a very small valley entrance, which only had to be held by only a few hundred of those Greeks at any particular moment. And across from this, they had the Persian army. So to make things simple, because there's a couple of different accounts of how many Persians there were, the most modern historians think that the Persians had somewhere around 300,000 fighting warriors in their army. That's a big number, especially compared to the measly 7,000 at best. But this is a lot smaller than what the ancient historians say. Ancient historians said that the Persians had up to 4 million in their army. However, again, modern historians think that's a little crazy, and it would have been extremely not feasible for ancient armies to amass such numbers. Nowadays, it's possible, but back then, not so much. So, Greeks, they had that advantage of having that small spot that they had to defend. And here's the thing, they weren't trying to win this battle. All they wanted was to hold out. They needed to make this battle last as long as possible for one of two things. Either A, they got backup from the city-states. These were all fast reaction forces that were all sent to try to head this army off to buy everybody else time. The second option was to just buy time for the city-states to figure out what to do, whether it be evacuate or to raise another army to take on this large Persian army down the road. And the Greeks, well, they certainly had the tactics to deal with this. They had the great tactic of the phalanx, which was a form of interlocking shields with your spears sticking out, so anyone that tries to get near you, well, A, gets stabbed by spears, and has the added bonus of keeping you safe from volleys of arrows. This worked extremely well for the Greeks because they were more heavily armored and their shields were a lot bigger than anything that the Persians used. This was so effective that literally for thousands of Persians that would die, only a couple Greeks would die in any conflict. And they had the benefit of being in that small valley head. Because they had those walls to their side, the Persians couldn't use their cavalry. So, that's how this managed to last as long as it did. So, in the first day of battle, Xerxes initially sent just a group of warriors, we're going to say a couple thousand, to test how this went, with pretty much most of them dying. This led Xerxes to send his elite warriors to try to deal with this. His elite force called the Immortals, of 10,000 warriors. To put it succinctly, they died. Very much so. They did not all die, but a good chunk of the Immortals died along with their main leader. The Greeks, they did quite well because they were able to actually swap out who was on the front line in between these little bouts of violence, because they had more people than they needed to actually hold this pass. So this was just a rinse and repeat for the first day. Persians would come in, they would die. At the end of the day, Xerxes was not happy. Second day was more or less the same repeat, except that is when our antagonist of this story, the Greek named Ephialtes, betrayed his allies by telling Xerxes of a hidden path through the mountains that would allow him to flank. But we're going to cover that in the next video, because we're all out of time here. And sadly, that's where things will start going foul. Alright, I'll catch you all in the next video.